This is the first of our panel discussions this afternoon as part of our One Day in May Revisited. And the first panel discussion today is focused on racism in day-to-day life, defined, identified, and recognized. And we're very happy to welcome 4 distinguished panelists to participate in our discussion this afternoon. And Joe Young, one of the panelists, is the director of the Pan-African Student Center here at Augsburg College and serves as a student advisor. And Mahmoud El-Kati is a professor at Macalester College in St. Paul and is a professor of history and African American studies, and spoke at our convocation this morning as he was part of the original One Day in May in 1968. And the Honorable Judge Pamela Alexander is Assistant Chief Judge of the Hennepin County District Court and has served is a alum of Augsburg College, has served in the past on the Board of Regents and as commencement speaker. And Erika Thorne is a white feminist who has devoted working for racial justice. Her passion for 17 years has been working with other white people to take responsibility for our racism and building coalitions. She will be co-facilitating the groundbreaking workshop Plantation Shuffle, which she co-created with the late Rebecca Rice at this June's Allies for Justice Conference, sponsored by the Headwaters Fund in St. Paul. And Erika is a partner in Future Now, a worker-owned business providing consulting and training to groups working for justice. And brochures for Allies for Justice and Future Now will be made
over at that round table with the blue tablecloth.
Available. Yep.
Thank you, sir.
All right, and I will leave it up to the panelists to make it through the day's discussion. I'm really excited to hear what they have to say.
Well, thank you for coming. We want to invite anyone out in the hallway to come on in. If you feel like coming on in, please be invited. As I start for a couple of minutes, I'm going to share a couple of quick thoughts. I actually have to dash out of here to go pick up our keynote for this evening. But I want to start some trouble, because oftentimes we dance around the issue of racism, particularly because we live in a politically correct climate and aren't really honest about what we're talking about, because oftentimes we take the word race and racism and have interwoven it with so many other things, watered it down, diluted, that even addressing it doesn't change any of the conditions that all of us complain about. So when we're talking about racism, what we're talking about is a system that can be properly defined as white supremacy, which is not based upon an individual, but based upon an ideal. And that ideal empowers all white, quote unquote, European descent folk to have a system of power and authority that subjugates all other non-white people. And so when you're talking about race and racism, the actuality of what you're dealing with is not an individual. It's not even a group of people, but it is a built-in structural system of practices and based on values that subordinate people one from another. And when you're addressing it, you have to address it as an ideal and not as an outcome, because we often address the outcome, and the only effect we can do is placing a bandage on scenarios that happen because of human conflict. But when we're talking about an ideal, we then need to come up against that ideal with a different ideal. And that to me becomes the crux of being able to address the issue of racism. Now, you also have to understand that racism is based upon a false notion called race. And this false notion has subjugated humanity into subspecies groups to the extent that we can define who people are, how they'll believe, what they'll act like, and how they'll respond to things based upon how they look. And all you have to do is recognize the works of Darwin and Carl von Linnaeus and recognize how they have contributed scientifically to the proportion of what this thing called race is all about. But on the flip side of that, most modern scientists, biologists, anthropologists, have all recognized, both individually and as conventions, that this notion of racism is such a false notion. it makes no sense that we continue to rely upon it to define who human beings are. And I find that to be intriguing in the context of academia, where we still use race to define who people are. It becomes almost a conflict where academia has defined race as a null and void concept, but still perpetuates it within the context of its systems and institutions. And so that becomes part of the challenge that I think we begin to have to address. And let me say one more thing. I've done a lot of recent work and reviewings of the teachings and even the foundations of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he put some things forward, in fact, that I believe ultimately got him killed. And that is, he began to assert, once he moved beyond the issue of race in terms of addressing some of the ills in our society, he began to tamper with the very fabric and foundations of our system. He said Americans should be divinely dissatisfied with what America is. And he cited 4 ills. And these 4 ills were interconnected. And they're very much alive and well today. The first issue was the issue of racism. That is the issue of dealing with people based upon the complexion and color of their skin. And if you're looking at it, even as I do, from the aspect of white supremacy, then you have to include sexism in that whole bulk of things. Then he began to recognize, as he was addressing the issue of race and racism, that poverty became an important aspect. As he continued to dig into poverty, he recognized militarism was an important aspect, and ultimately materialism was fundamentally the flaw that exists in the United States society. And so he began to recognize that we need to be divinely, as he put it, dissatisfied, and this is what he wrote in the Testament of Hope, with racism, poverty, materialism, or militarism and materialism, and recognizing how interconnected these things are. Because once you start peeling the issues of racism away, you're going to find poverty. Once you start peeling the issues of poverty away, you're going to start finding militarism, and then fundamentally, you're going to start peeling away till you get to materialism. And these things are what he recognized as the fabric of things that we've become so complacent with that we don't even recognize how victimized we all are by them. And subsequently to that, he put together something that the Bishop Desmond Tutu tried to use in South Africa to address those issues. And the whole aspect of what he called what Desmond Tutu called divine reconciliation happens not because we want, as human beings, to put the effort in, but we need to recognize a God force, the God power, the God kind of thought about what we're doing as human beings. And that is, the issue that we're trying to deal with is reconciliation, and the first step in divine reconciliation is repentance. And that means you have to admit with a certain type of contrition that something is wrong, something that's never happened from the context of our society as a whole, specifically from the context of our government as it relates to the issue of race. It's never been admitted that something was wrong. In fact, even up until last September, when the World Congress on Racism got together, the United States pulled out of that because they did not want to admit that slavery was wrong, and slavery was a crime in the eyes of humanity. That's the reason that this government pulled out of that Congress, because had they admit that, then the fear of all kinds of subsequent subpoenas and court battles with the issues, particularly of those who are descendants of slaves, would arise. But I submit that until you repent, there will be no reconciliation. Until you repent, you can't even talk about reparation. Even though reparation is an issue that's being addressed and needs to be addressed, the first aspect of reparations is admitting that something was wrong. And until that happens, the issue of race and racism will continue to plague our society and humanity, as it always has, in fact, even in more covert and subversive ways that we don't even have a tendency to recognize on a day-to-day basis. So with that, I've said my few little pieces of stuff, and I'll turn it over to our next panelist.
And I'm supposed to follow that, I guess. First of all, I want to thank you for having this discussion on race. A lot of times I have agreed to come out to these because I think that in order to deal with the issue of race, we have to have a discussion. And I think in the last several years, we've moved away from even having discussions about race, and that we tend to want to kind of stick our head in the ground. After September 11th, it was very interesting in that people were kind of coming together saying, oh gee, we're all Americans, we're all this and all that. And then we had another layer of reacting to race. And I know a lot of you, if you went to the airport since then, and everybody's kind of getting pulled out of line and being looked at, and look at the people who are still being looked at. They're still, the majority of them are people of color. They may look a little different, and I want to tell you, a large number of African Americans are also being pulled aside and looked at, and kind of in subterfuge are being looked at for other reasons. And quite frankly, you know, I get searched every time, even before September 11th, so it really wasn't a huge surprise to me, even though I don't think I meet the Joy Courier profile, because I think I'm too old now. I finally have enough gray hair that perhaps they won't stop me, but that hasn't happened yet. And recently, on my most recent trip with my 13-year-old, they kind of let me go by, but they stopped and searched her, which I thought was a little bit much. But in any event, race is one of those things that we have to continue to discuss, we have to continue to talk about, and we have to continue to try to recognize in order to come to some sort of resolution. And this is something that I've been talking about since I was a student here at Augsburg College many years ago. And I wasn't here in 1968, but I came soon thereafter, very quickly thereafter, as a matter of fact. And there were still vestiges of all of that discussion at the time. And Augsburg, I think, came through kind of a metamorphosis at that time, because then it became very fashionable to have African American students on your campus. So we got like a whole lot of them when I came in. And the campus really wasn't ready to adjust to us when we got here, which was the first time then they got a black student coordinator, which now y'all call director of the Pan African Center. But the first one came when I was a student here, and I think that a lot of it was adjustments to us being on campus. And I remember my first month here at Augsburg, the Dean of Women at the time, they had a Dean of Women, and she invited us all over to her house, and she told us she was going to sit down and have a discussion with us as to how we should conduct ourselves while we were here, students at Augsburg. And you know, we all sat down, and there were a number of African American women students at the time. I'd say there were probably 25 of us. There was a recruitment of our class was about 50, I think. We had quite a number who came in at the time. And she was going to teach us how to, you know, eat at the table and what fork to use and etiquette and those kinds of things. And, you know, I kind of explained to her, you know, I learned that when I was about, you know, 5. And we went over it in Girl Scouts too, and I kind of knew. And so I didn't really want to stay for the discussion. And Mahmoud will never believe this, but I was a teeny bit militant at the time. Just a teeny bit. I've gotten better as I've gotten older, a teeny bit. And I kind of went, this is the most insulting thing I've ever seen. What made you think that we couldn't eat before we got here? You know, and so I said, no, we're all leaving. So I made everybody get up and leave. And so then they kind of went, she's going to be a problem. And so I did organize a number of protests of different things while we were here at Augsburg for a number of different reasons. We did have a situation that arose here as well, where there was a person who had been raping folks in the neighborhood while I was a student here. And what happened during that time is that the police kind of came over, invited by the college, and really just stopped every black person they saw, whether it was male, female, or whatever, and basically we were held on the ground at gunpoint. Well, we were a little concerned. You know, we were students and we were trying to go to class, and there were issues. So we said, you know, we really would like not to be held at gunpoint, going, you know, to class back and forth. And so would you all do something about that? And the dean didn't really want to hear it. So we had a protest and took over his office and did some other things that you all should never really do now. You know, peaceful protest is something, and you know, and I'm sure your dean is much more open to hearing your ideas than they were in those days. So there was a lot of adjustment to having the number of students that we had at the time. And I'm telling you this because Augsburg was it was a real learning experience for me. I grew up in South Minneapolis, but I went to Minneapolis Central, and I kind of grew up in a neighborhood that, you know, I knew everybody and everybody knew us, and I really didn't face a whole lot of real in-your-face kind of racism really until I got to Augsburg and ran into people who had never dealt or been around people of color previously or seen people of color previously, and I didn't think those people existed. So when I got here, and I had just turned 17, I was an early admit, and I couldn't believe that there were people who had really never even talked to black folks before. I didn't believe those people existed really. And so it was not only that, it was an eye-opening experience for me. And I was also very open to learn about, you know, lutefisk and Swedish meatballs and all that. I mean, I was very open to the whole experience, quite frankly. And I was real open to learning as much as I could about cultures that were different than my own, but I did not see kind of that reciprocation. And we worked real hard as students while we were here to, one, let our presence be known, and to let people kind of know about us, learn about us, and learn about things that were unique to African Americans. And I think that it really was helpful. We did form a very strong Black Student Union while we were here. We did a lot of very positive things on campus, some things that you may never even hear about that we did. But I think that it really was boded well for the school of really kind of adjusting to us and then being more open to hearing some of the ideas that we had, even though we had to push it a little bit. And I think that Augsburg has become more open in how they see things than they have been in the past. But I'm going to talk a little bit about my daily life and what I see in the court system here and some of the things that I've seen in Minneapolis and I think that are happening nationwide. I'm very concerned about the whole issue of race. I'll give you some of my personal experiences, and then I'm going to give you some of the things that I see in terms of racial profiling, in terms of the kinds of folks that I see coming into court all the time, and the kinds of things that are so institutionally ingrained in our system that it's very, very difficult to kind of move to the next level. And I've been fighting racism within the criminal justice system for many years. So this has been a 25, 30-year fight for me to deal with those particular issues. If you went and sat in any court in Hennepin County, whether that was in downtown Minneapolis, in Brookdale, Southdale, or Ridgedale, you're going to find that 40 to 80% of the people who come through are people of color, regardless of where you may be sitting. We have a full-time Spanish interpreter, actually 3, that work the Southdale courthouse every day, and those are the western suburbs. So to give you an idea of who's coming into court. And the kinds of things that I see are not necessarily, because you say, okay, well, they just commit more crimes. Well, you know, that's really not true. And I find that a lot of people are stopped, and I call them crimes of convenience, especially a lot of my Hispanic brothers who come in. They're stopped merely because they're Hispanic to see if they're legal, to see if they have driver's licenses. And so the kinds of charges we get are not the driving conduct that got them stopped, but driving without a license, driving after suspension, driving because you're in Richfield and we want to stop you. And that's primarily what we're getting. And so we're starting to throw a number of those cases out because we think they're pretext stops, that they're not really being stopped because they're doing anything wrong. You know, in America, you're supposed to do something wrong first before somebody can do something to you. That's what I thought. Then I got a couple cases where it showed me that it really wasn't the pretext at all. I had the opportunity also to sit on a case and issue a very strong opinion about a group of young men. These happened to be Asian young men who were standing in a parking lot. And they were all stopped, searched, and arrested because they were standing in the parking lot. And the police officer felt so okay with it, he wrote, well, I just stopped them because they were in the parking lot. And I figured they were too young to be there. We also got a youth thing going on too. So generally, if you're over 50 and white and male, you can probably walk around pretty free. But when you're between 15 and 25, you might have some issues because, police don't like y'all's group either. And, well, because, we think we don't like you. And so, that's the crime group. That's the crime age. Then, because, all the studies show you crime out after a certain age. Yeah, because, you just don't want to crime anymore. So you kind of go outside of that. You're like, I'm sick of the police, so I'm not going to commit any more crimes after this particular age. So we figure after 35, you're usually, even if you were like a real entrenched criminal, you tend to not do that after you turn 35. So between 15 and 25, we got a youth thing going, and then you have all these folks of color who are coming in, and I'm telling you, it's becoming increasingly problematic when we see the types of things that people are coming into court on. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some people who are criminals and need to be locked up, and I'm doing my fair share of making sure that they're off the street protecting you all. That's part of my job, and I do that well, and I do recognize that there's some people who need to be in jail. So don't get me wrong with these kinds of comments. But we also have a whole segment of people who are coming in for no particular reason. And we had a practice in my county not too long ago where folks were just arrested, kept in jail for 2 or 3 days, and then just let go. Never charged, never anything. And you kept saying, well, what'd you have them here for? So people kept complaining like, hello, we're getting arrested. Would y'all do something? No one's charging us with anything. So what we did then was we had to institute jail detention reviews by an independent party, generally judges, who go in now 7 days a week, 24/7. We go in and review to make sure that the right people are in jail so that we're not keeping people that shouldn't be there. Now, to me, we shouldn't have to do that. But we have to do that to have a check and balance to make sure that the right people are always there. Now I'm going to give you some of my own personal experiences. Because you all look up here and go, look, she's a very successful judge. She's got on a nice, gray suit, a nice conservative turtleneck, pretty jewelry, all of that. Well, let me tell you, I have lawyers. I've been a judge now for 19 years. I have lawyers who have appeared in my courtroom many, many times that if I see them on the street will not speak or acknowledge who I am. Will not speak to me, will turn their head and walk the other way if they see me in any other kind of context than sitting in my courtroom. I have lawyers who have come in and told me that they were uncomfortable because my staff happens to be of color, various ones, various shades. I have some white people too, but they don't like that. And they've told me that they're uncomfortable coming into my courtroom. And, and I said, and you're telling me that for what reason? They said, well, we just want you to know how uncomfortable we are. So I told them, adjust. Because there's just, you're just going to have to adjust. There are people of color in the world that have jobs, responsible ones, and you're going to have to adjust to that. There are days when there was a time when my husband and I, we were going to the grocery store, we drove in, stopped in the parking lot. There was an elderly couple next to us, saw us, would not get out of their car, immediately locked the door, and would not come anywhere near us. We went to also, there was a notice that was sent out not too long ago about a level 3 sex offender moving into the neighborhood, so we went to the meeting, just like everybody else, our neighborhood too, so we thought we'd go to the meeting. And about 40% of the people thought my husband was the sex offender, merely because we walked into the building. Now, and I'm going to tell you, he's a very nice-looking older gentleman with nice gray hair. He came in a suit, looked very nice, I thought. And so it just went to show me, I don't care how you look, what you do, people tend to see color. And we went in there, and when I left the meeting, I told them that the most disheartening thing about the meeting was not the fact that we were meeting about a level 3 sex offender who may be moving in the neighborhood, but that now that my fellow citizens and the people where I've been paying taxes all this time will now feel that other black folks who live in the neighborhood are now public enemy number 1 because that sex offender happens to be African American. So there's always this kind of group think, is what I call it, where people can't differentiate and can't particularly know. I mean, there's some bad black folks, there's some bad white folks. but there's some good black folks and there's some good, I mean, there's good and bad in everybody. And we can't just judge people by how they look. And I think that one of the things, and I'm going to turn it over to Mahmoud, that I am impressed about is the fact that you're continuing to have these discussions, you're continuing to look at these issues that have become more and more concerning, especially in bad economic times. And we're getting ready to go into that. Now, we've had some good times, and times are going to get rough coming up here. And when the rougher it gets, the more reactionary people become. And I had the opportunity, I don't listen to the radio, but I decided I was going to listen to the radio. So I asked my daughter to find something that she thought was suitable for her mom to listen to. So she said, okay, so she was having a very good time, and she found a radio station she thought I would be able to listen to. So I said, oh, okay. And as I was listening to it, first of all, I was cringing through the whole thing because of the fact I kept thinking, I'm letting my 13-year-old listen to this? I can't believe this. But the sexist comments, the racist comments, the sexual innuendos that were made through the whole thing was alarming. And so I was looking at what it is that you all are being fed on a daily basis, and it's very concerning to me in terms of the images that the society is continuing to perpetuate as to what it is that you're bringing in on a daily basis. And even though you're not paying a whole lot of attention to it, it's seeping in and seeping in and seeping in. And I'm not just talking about this radio station or that radio station, because quite frankly, I can't even tell you what radio station it was because I turned it off probably after 5 minutes. And because I thought I had enough. And then I tried to listen to talk radio, which I do listen to occasionally, just so I can kind of judge what the tenor of and the mood is. And that was also very disturbing also, because we're talking about, and very flippantly, about issues that I think are very near and dear to me, and we're not having good, cogent conversations about what is really real. And I have a lot of issues with that. And I hope, as young people, and it's my hope all the time, and I tell you, I go to bed hoping and praying. I said, these young people have to be smarter than this. They just have to be. Because if they're not smarter, we are really in a heap of trouble. And so I'm putting a whole lot on you because I want you to be smarter about these issues. I want you to have discussions about the issues. And I talked to a young man, young white guy, I'll tell you, who worked for me for about 8 weeks or so. And we were talking about issues of how society could really improve itself in terms of homelessness, in terms of joblessness, and the kinds of underclass that we are tending to create. And he had some very good observations and some very good suggestions. And I was so hopeful after I left my conversation with him, because I said, I think the youth of today might really get this. And it's obvious through this discussion that you're having today that we may be in pretty good hands.
He always does that to me. She leaves me with nothing to say. Yes, he always does that to me.
Yeah.
Well, Judge Alexander and I want to say this on a personal note, and I have been around one another off and on for a very long time. I've known her since she was in junior high school or something like that. I don't know. It wasn't grade school.
I was 12.
No, no. Don't say that. Anyway, long time, most of her life, and watched her grow and flower, and it just makes you feel good. Every time she walks in a room, it makes me feel good. I may be feeling bad, but I feel better when I see her, because I know it's all right. Somebody got it right. I'm going to just make a few wild stops. First, Mufandizi Joe left not much for me to say because I thought he made a very compelling, gave a very compelling definition of race and what that turns out to be when it becomes ism, a state of condition of being, active And I want to pick up on that. But first I want to say to you, those of you who've bothered to come and bothered to listen, that you are very important people. I don't believe in the lopsided majority. I may sound elitist. I think it's always the creative minority which moves and shakes the world for good or evil. And one hopes that one or two of you will get it right about this race thing. And that's enough. But it's not enough for you to get it right. I mean, that's not enough. I said that's enough. It's not enough for you to just get it right in your head intellectually. You must try to actualize that. And one of the ways you do that, I'm putting the cart before the horse, is that you engage yourself with people who are different. That's where you start. And you can do that on an individual basis. It doesn't have to be a group, an organization. The preacher doesn't have to tell you to do that. You can do that. That's how you start. As, who is it? Zora Neale Hurston, one of our great writers out of the African American tradition, says, you know, when I look at groups of people and I see them as a group of people, the closer I get to them, the more they become individuals with personalities. And that's what people are. We are fundamentally, inescapably social animal. We can't live outside of a social context. Nobody can. Yes, you have uniqueness, meaning your individuality, not individualism. I think that's fraudulent too. But people are unique as individuals. But you still have to be related to somebody, some human beings, some reference group, or you can't exist as a human being. The human animal is essentially a social animal. That's what that means. You can't live just within yourself. You have to live outside of yourself. And that means other human beings. You follow me? Are you sure? Okay. You know, his daughter is coming. But Malcolm X used to say, I was lucky enough to see him 3 times. You know, the audience didn't quite get him. He said, do you understand me? And they'd say, yeah. And he said, I know you don't. Because you know, I know you don't. You're not used to hearing this talk. So it takes a while for it to seep in. But let me just say this. I appreciate your coming. I was here in that one day of May. It was so hopeful and time at the same. It was a very terrifying time. Some ugly and marvelous things were going on at the same time. The 1960s, I think, is the most critical decade in 20th century history in America. And there's no period, I'll focus on this decade, in history to equal that in terms of what America was, is, both good and bad. It all happened at the same time. All right, thank you. Pandora's box was open, and people in certain ways have been freer than they've ever been. That includes white, end quote, white people, I'll get to that later, were freer in ways that they had not known by that decade. Not the kind, it's a different kind of freedom because whites and blacks operate on a different power differential. It has nothing to do, as Joe said, with you personally. That's just the way it is. You know, the way the structure of the society is. But white people didn't have the personal liberties that they have now, which is different from what you call equality and that kind of stuff. If Judge Marshall were here, he would tell you that. You get more personal freedoms that your parents couldn't imagine. Their parents couldn't imagine. You know, they're middle-aged people now, but they were scared, many of them, of their own shadow. This was a very constipated country in the 1950s and the 60s, socially, politically, otherwise. And that freed up whites, rediscovered themselves. Now, their struggle was not like black people, the right to vote, the right to go to a restaurant or a hotel. That was different. They were givens like the air for them. But in terms of their own locked-in lives, they were in big trouble. And I think, I know it's the other side, that many white people didn't like themselves very well. And all that showed. It came out. Because the black struggle had opened Pandora's box. That was our role. We let the genie out of the bottle. So everybody could get a little free. As I was trying to break down barriers to get a cup of coffee or go to the University of Minnesota, white people were discovering that I'm something other than white. You know, that I'm 19 years old, I'm 18 years old, and I can fight an award to defend a country which I can't participate in as a voter. They discovered that. And people discovered that I'm not just white, you know, I have something else going on inside of me in terms of my sexuality. And I've got to stop making myself suffer and do what black people do. Come out of the closet. Are you following me? Okay, yeah. It's all, I'm saying we're social animals. We all connect. Everything has a place, and yet everything is related to everything else on this earth. And that's an example of what happened, how people were freed in a way that they weren't free before. You know, it's interesting when you get old enough to, and reflective to see how people interpret things, how differently we can interpret things. You know, some people only have the bird's eye view. Some of us have the frog's eye view, too. Some of us can see this. And Richard Wright pointed out that the struggle between black and white people, end quote, in this country is essentially a struggle over the definition of reality. What is real? To me, may not be real to you, and vice versa. But I have to, in some ways, respect your reality, I mean, because of the power differential. And my reality can be dismissed because I don't have power, not real power, which comes through the expression of racism. Now let me move quickly to what I want to pick up on, and I'll come back to that. About race. That's the greatest challenge you have faced. I'm saying Americans. This is affecting, what we do affects the 6 billion people who inhabit this earth in ways that they don't quite, what they do affect us. That's just a fact. At this point in history, America represents what Egypt represented 6,000 years ago. It was a center post of the world as we understand it, as they understood it during Egyptian time. And that's true now. I think that's undeniable. Nobody can deny that. That's the only remaining superpower. And we hope this country uses its power for good. Martin Luther King, before him Du Bois, before him Frederick Douglass, before them Mary Church Terrell, Mary McLeod Bethune, all had this in common about black people, that we want to drive America towards its better self. That's our job. It's good. That's the black people's job. It could be a good country. It's already a great country, but it's not good. And good don't mean great. The sinking of the Titanic was a great event. You know, 4-alarm fire is great. Bigness, rawness, but it's not good, and we have to say that. And so long as people, humanity can be dismissed by you looking at the shape of my nose and how much melanin I've got in my skin, it can't be a good country. People are not taught to be good, not taught to respect, to see beyond the superficial. And it all boils down to something, this modern superstition, this thing that was invented in the last 3.5 centuries that we call race, categories of people, pigeonhole people by physicality, physical traits, and extrapolate from that everything else about them. That's really what race teaches you, and that simply is not true. It comes out of the scientific community, and now science is denying that race, there's no biological reality to race. And science has been saying that for 40 years. Now it's seeping out into the popular mind. I'm seeing more articles and more people letting common sense take over and look at what you're calling race. It really doesn't exist biologically, but it does exist as a social construction. It does exist institutionally. You follow me? I know you don't. Okay. Race evolved in the last 300 or 400 years. According to Dr. Ashley Montague, who read the powerful book, Man's Most Dangerous Myth, the fallacy of race, tracing the word back to its etymology, to when it entered the English language in 1573, and how people applied, the early naturalists, the people who we now call anthropologists and so forth, used a term to classify all the fauna and flora of the earth. It wasn't just about people. It could be a race of flowers, a race of horses, a race of grass blades, so whatever. And when the philosophers came around, the Decomte Gouberneuses and the Houston Stewart Chamberlains, the spiritual father of Adolf Hitler and all, they took it out of that construct and applied it only to people. And then first you applied it to different people in Europe. There were many races in Europe, according to this. It's a floating signifier. That's what race is. There was a time when, if you were living in the 19th century, a person would say, call you a German and use the terms interchangeably, race with nationality. He's of the German race. Instead of the Irish race. You still hear some of that stuff. It's left over. But white, it was white on white. White people were talking about white people. The Polish race, you see. And the Polish, yeah. And logic can tell you how it happened when the exploration period, when Chris, remember Chris? You know what I'm talking about? Discovered something? All right, yeah, well, let me tell you right now. Chris got lost. That's the truth. Let's be truthful about that. Chris got lost. He didn't know quite where he was going. After he got where he was going, didn't know where he was. After he got back, didn't know where he'd been, and he did it with somebody's money. So he's a real hustler. But Chris, the exploration, where Europeans, like no other people, saw all these different populations of people, different colors and so forth. And this is when the categorizing and pigeonholing and so forth. And one guy came up with 17 different races in Africa before it crystallized into skin color alone. 17 different races in Africa. In Europe, you had the Nordic race, the Alpine race, the Mediterranean race. Yeah. This evolved. Man went to study the people in the Caucasus. Johannes Blumenbach, who's the father of anthropology, studied these tow-headed, blue-eyed, fair-skinned people and called them Caucasians. And as time would have it, it became generally applied to people with light skin, not just with blonde hair, blue eyes, and pale skin. And that's the so-called white man, which is a modern construction. I defy you to find Europeans call themselves white before that period. They're more likely to find their solidarity around Christianity because the world had been divided. The Christians and the heathens. You're a Christian? Well, that's the definition. When they dealt with Indians, they called the Native Americans heathens versus what? Christians. Not white. As the closer we get to modern times, the more stuff like white. And of course, I need not tell any black person with any common sense that no Negroes came out of Africa. I hope you know that. Igbos came out of Africa, Hausas, Yorubas, Ashantes, Mandinkas, all of these proud people who had histories ancient, more ancient than Europe, than what we call Europe today. So there are no Negroes, that's a category. Indians in America, that's a category, a racial category. Oh, okay. I'm getting a signal. I thought I was going to give a lecture, but that's all right. Racial categories, when you meet your Native American friends, they don't tell you they're Indian, they tell you what? The name of their what? Nation. Which is what? Is it Chippewa?
No.
Is it, what is it?
Anishinaabe.
Anishinaabe. Where I came from in the Deep South, the people around me were Seminoles, Cherokees, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creeks in the southeastern part of the country. And that's what they call themselves. Because that connotes what? Language, land, and so forth. That's who human beings are. If you want the real identity of human beings, all human beings, is language. When you back into the who-ness of you, it's language, land, customs, mores, habits, what we're pleased to call culture and ethnicity today. So, I have to cut off what I was trying to say about racism. Let me give you just 2 more minutes to say this. Race if you don't have race, without race, you have the construction, the false, the superstition, I call it, the superstition is comparable to having possessions or believing in ghosts and so forth. Because the word exists, you think the reality exists. Not so. So racism involved an act of discrimination. It's not prejudice, which is an attitude. I'm prejudiced about a lot of things, meaning I don't know the facts. You know, you act without knowing the facts. But racism has nothing to do with the facts. You could know the facts. Because it's also ideological. It's an indoctrination into the way you interpret and look at life. And all of this has been formed in the last 300 or 400 years. The Constitution originally was a racist document, 1787. That's why the great William Lloyd Garrison, the white abolitionist, says what? The Constitution has a covenant with hell. It has a date with death. It's not worth the paper it's written on. Tear it up. Burn it up, because it's a slaveholding document. And it was, until it was changed.
We can keep the 14th Amendment.
Yeah. Well, no, this is before the 14th Amendment.
I know, so I want to keep that part.
Yeah, but no. Well, one of your mentors said, the late Thurgood Marshall, he said, you know, after the Bill of Rights, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, the 19th Amendment dealing with women, you can tear it up. It ain't worth the paper it's written on. That is the essence of the Constitution. That's right. To protect your individuals' right, the Bill of Rights, you know, the right to speak. You know, I wouldn't be talking here if it weren't for the Bill of Rights, right? And the amendments which legally freed black people, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, and the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote in 1920. He says that's what it is. But you look at it as a commercial document. Mostly it's about people, you know, doing their business. It's about slaves. It's about commerce. That's what it's about. And so the original abolitionists was called the Constitution. They were talking about secession before the South. So no union with slavery. That was the slogan in the North. No union with slavery, because it's a slave document. It's a commercial document. And it was. Now, this is what I really don't like about Americans. And I can say that because I'm an American. You know, it's like family, okay? I hope I can say that. You know, been here long enough to say that. I don't like the idea of people playing stupid on me. You know, like intellectuals and lawyers and people like that. I don't like that. When I know that you know, and you're pretending that you don't know, intellectual. That's got to stop. One last, and I won't say the rest of it. A man I know who's a lawyer, who was a diplomat, who was a dean of the law school at Harvard, everything. You know, he was raised in an international, he knows everything. And we got to talking some way. He likes to talk to me. I don't know why. But he said, we got around to talking about Thomas Jefferson. And I told him what I thought was of Thomas Jefferson. I thought he was a great man with some obvious flaws. And everybody has some flaws. It just so happened his flaws were devastating to our people. And so he could not be a hero to me. You know, even though he's a hero to you, and that's okay. You know, these are two realities that Richard Wright was talking about. It's okay. You know, but he can't be a hero to me. You know, I laid off, you know, what I thought was wrong with him when he talked about black people being, I advanced it as a suspicion only that whether originally distinct or made distinct by time and circumstances, that the blacks are not equal to the whites, both in the endowments of the mind and body. They're not. They're inferior. And then he turns around and appoints Benjamin Banneker to help build the city of Washington, who was black. I know you've heard of Benjamin Banneker. Okay, you know, he was one of the 3 men on that commission to help build the city. He exploited black people's genius, but at the same time, that's racism. He's one of the authors of white supremacy. And I think he's also a pedophile. Yeah, he said, well, he said, well, I never heard of that. Well, I said, damn it. Read Notes on Virginia. You get most of it. He wrote that book. I didn't. And he said he never read the book. And I said, I don't believe you. not as well raised. You speak 3 languages. I only speak 2, broken English and profanity. And you know this stuff. So don't stop. We got an argument. I don't.
One of the only places that phrase might have some use. We have got to say no in a most profound way. How? It's a good question, it's a big question, but there are 2 ingredients in my experience that are absolutely crucial. One is self-education, support, personal commitment, which leads to individual and collective action. I put some handouts on that table that has a blue checked tablecloth, those balloon tables there that has a blue check. One is European Americans working together on our racism. Great handout. Please take it. Please use it. It talks about how we can address over time in an in-depth way what we need to do to dismantle racism. Please see also there's a 3-page sheet, a few resources for race and class transformation work for transforming these systems. Those are on that table too. And please notice when I'm talking about self-education, support, getting what we need to get, the resources to dismantle racism, I am not talking about, and I want to emphasize this, I'm not talking about latching on to a person of color and objectifying that person by saying, okay, I'm going to work on my racism and you got to help. You know, I can't do it without you. Not true, not true. I've got a whole 4-page handout here about how white people can work on our racism together. It's not that coalitions don't need to be formed. It's not that authentic relationships of mutual humanity don't need to be formed. However, just what I just said, latching on to a person of color so that they will work on my racism for me, it won't work. And it's racism. It's one of the actual epitomes of our white liberal racism that we find here in the upper Midwest a lot. Okay, second thing needed in addition to self-education and support, a profound process of transformation in which we tap the origins of our own racism, tap the privilege that it gives us, work it through. And this is partly with what Mahmoud said, is there is a reclamation of our own humanity that is necessary for us to actually work on racism. And that is one of the self-interested reasons why we work on racism, because everybody who's been complicit in the racist system that you've heard about here is stunted. There are parts of everybody has been damaged by the system of racism. How to heal from that damage is to dismantle that system, is to fight against it, even no matter how daunted we might feel about it. And I want to say on the back of the 4-page handout is a notice of a workshop called Plantation Shuffle that is coming here in June. That's coming. I'm going to co-facilitate it in June as part of the Allies for Justice conference, and there are handouts for that Allies for Justice conference too. I'm saying this not only because it's a terrific workshop, and I want you to take it. It's because I want to give you really concrete things to do. So I'm giving you a process, working on your racism. I'm talking to the white people here, obviously, in the room. I'm given resources about race and class work. I'm given something that you can do this June, is take this high impact workshop. And finally, what I want to say in terms of concretely what you can do is the final handout I have over there is interracial conversation. These are crude stick figures. I realize I'm from pre-computer age. Eventually somebody will probably volunteer to get it on a computer. It's what white people tend to bring to a interracial conversation compared to what people of color tend to bring. Very potent theory in this, and I support you to pick it up and find it. Thank you very, very much. There is work that we can do right now, right today, together. I'm here as a resource. There are some other white people here as resources. Let's go do it.
Are there any questions? You probably can do one.
Yeah, we're really running out of
Yeah,
time.
we're out
We'll
of
take
time.
one question.
I was just wondering, what has your experience been, you were talking about the criminal justice system in terms of lawyers. What has the experience been in terms of criminal justice system in terms of neighborhoods in the city?
You know, what I found is that I think at this particular point in time, neighborhoods are probably a bit more segregated than they were when I was a kid. There's been, you know, I think in the 68, 69 time frame, when I grew up in South Minneapolis, a pretty integrated place to live. Right after the riots in 68, there was grand white flight out of the city. And now I think that people are continuing to move further out and further out and further out and further out. And we are kind of abandoning cities right now. And I have some very deep concern about that. And the city and the inner rural suburbs, I think, and now with really the shift in political power, which is basically going to be rest in the suburbs, I think if decisions are made just based on what's good for people, now, and we're not talking about the inner ring suburbs, we're talking about the outer ring suburbs, then I think that we're going to be in real big trouble. In neighborhoods, although there's a lot of movement politically within neighborhoods in the city, and a lot of people are organizing on kind of a grassroots level, and I'm real energized by that. But I'm also very concerned because we're getting more into that us and them mentality than we've ever been in the past. And a lot of that has been brought on by the lack of housing, lack of job opportunities, and a lot of kind of economic factors that are out there that are going to become very key, I think, in the next 5 years politically. So you all have some real issues. So do I, too. When I say y'all, I mean me, too. I'm not going anywhere.
I really hate to cut off. I mean, we're having a really awesome conversation here, and part of the idea of the day is to kind of take the same energy and apply it to a bunch of different social justice issues. So we got a few different. We want to leave enough time to give respect for the rest of the panels that are coming up. But invite everybody to stick around. There's going to be a lot more good stuff going on today. But thanks again to our panel.
Thank you.